this morning. That. Well, yeah. I used to sing in a choir in an Anglican church. In fact, I directed that choir eventually for 7 years. But I was told by the organist that taught me, organ in fact, that you can't carry a tune in a wheelbarrow. So I guess I have, I'm not sure. I did all right over there. We're going to do another duet, he and I. Snails. I want to talk about snails this morning. And in fact, I've got one of my, we now have 3 youngsters here that are studying chemistry. I'm missing one. Oh, John's not here. I was going to say, where'd Jonathan go? Amber is visiting from Hollis Center. She's in my chemistry class. Tomorrow is the last day. And actually, the sessions are basically over. Thinking about that, one thing we didn't talk about in chemistry was surface tension very much. Snails. Snails. What's so marvelous about a snail? Well, there is a team of scientists from MIT that are studying how snails move. Snails are kind of incredible. Snails can do what no other creature pretty much can do. A snail can move on every kind of surface. A snail can move straight up a wall. A snail can move upside down. A snail can sleep upside down. Aren't they amazing? Snails are absolutely amazing. Well, how do snails do that? Well, MIT, with all of the computer technology available, has built this 10-inch long, cumbersome-looking device they call RoboSnail. RoboSnail is about as advanced as a pencil compared to a computer. RoboSnail can move on a flat surface if the surface is clean. If the surface is dirty, RoboSnail can't move. RoboSnail cannot move up a wall. RoboSnail cannot move upside down. But snails can do that. And the reason snails can do that is a combination of chemistry. The snails have been studied in the past by biologists. Well, now they've got chemists and physicists and engineers involved. That'll muddle it up, right? No, snails actually, it's not a biological thing as much as it is a physics-chemistry thing. A snail moves on a very thin layer of fluid. The thinner the layer of fluid, the more force it takes to push something along. Trying to duplicate what a snail... Oh, by the way, the other problem is with RoboSnail is that you have to put the lubricant down in front of him. Now, this is work being done right now at MIT. They can't figure out yet how to create this the goop or ooze or slime as it's going, but God did. Now, isn't it interesting? Every scientist knows that you're not going to throw a bunch of stuff together, rattle it around in a bin, and have it come out designed. We are using the best intelligence we have. MIT, school number 1, right, for engineering intelligence. Computers, rapid thinking computers. All of that stuff, and we can't match a snail. They want to. If they can manufacture something small, it has all kinds of applications and not just space travel. Apparently they're thinking space travel. They can have this little snail thing move along a planet, but you can have it move along. Apparently, I guess the military's interested. They can think about it. You get the little tiny camera like this, instead of just being planted somewhere like a bug in a room, if you can just put it down on the floor and have it walk across the floor. At a snail's pace, of course. All kinds of application to these things. But the focus of this creation moment is simply this. Think about how intricately designed a snail is. A snail has its own house. He's got his big snail foot. He creates his own ooze. And he can create that ooze and move along on that ooze on top of Jell-O. He's not restricted to surface. He can move on any surface. A marvelous, incredible design. And here we are in the modern world trying to imitate what God obviously designed. The thought that this could have happened by accident is ludicrous, and I honestly have to believe that in their heart of hearts, the MIT scientists working on this know very well this was not an accident. They are trying to match a design. Besides that, by the way, I'll close with this. Snails taste pretty good. You ever eat one? If you go to a reasonable restaurant, like they call them escargot. Nobody calls them snails. Snails just sounds too crude, I guess. But I have eaten escargot. They're very good dipped in butter. I never thought when I was eating one that I was eating such a marvelous machine. But there you have it. Next time you gobble down a snail and dip him in garlic butter, remember that they're very good. They really are. How many of you have eaten them, by the way? Just out of curiosity. Oh, only a few. All right. Very intricately designed. Think about that. And once again, the brains of modern man, modern scientists are trying to imitate and copy what God has already done. Thank you.
Fish tastes better than snail.
Oh, she said fish tastes. Have you had them? Oh, fish heads. Oh, that's another story. She likes fish heads. I don't. Would you rather be a fish? The classic position, or the position of evolution, it stands on a very classic philosophy that if you don't use it, you lose it. In fact, there are scientists today that honestly believe that if we knew what we know now about genetics, about the DNA molecule, that the theory of evolution would never have been proposed the way that it was. The idea is that once upon a time there was nothing, of course, that condensed itself into a little tiny energy egg smaller than the head of a needle, tip of a pin. It then exploded, creating stuff, particles, matter, rocks. And in the presence of time, billions of years, of course, those rocks formed, with the right atmosphere, a primordial soup. I don't have my props, they're back there. This primordial soup, out of this soup crawled a frog, and the frog became a prince. That's classic evolution, all by accident, all by chance. And along the way, whether you accept the ladder approach or the tree branch approach done by Stephen Jay Gould, proposed by Gould, we have to be, as human beings, had to have come from something that was similar to us, if you're an evolutionist. And that is, as my boss said one time when I was working for the Navy, didn't the monkey just fall out of a tree one? Plop onto the ground, and that's it? That's where we came from? Well, that's the position. You see, we have to have somehow come from the monkeys, you see, because, well, I don't want to insult anybody. We look like them somewhat. Some of us more than others, thank you. Yes, I offer myself as an example. And the idea of monkey intelligence, or gorilla or ape, or whatever you want to call them, that their intelligence is right up there. Is it? Is it really right up there? Of course, as Christians, we know better. And once again, on vacation, I had a chance to share my views in the swimming pool. It always startles people when I tell them that, yeah, I spent 30 years as a physicist with the Navy. I worked my whole life. I'm trained in science, and I worked in science. And it was through science that I came to Bethany Baptist Church as pastor, because I was so moved by the creation-evolution nonsense, if you will. The evolution is a nonsensical position. It's not scientific. It's a religious position. So I had a chance to share that. Well, I ran across, speaking of swimming pools and water, I ran across an interesting article. Fish. Or would you rather be a fish? As it turns out, fish are highly intelligent. Now, you're going to laugh at this, but there's a team of scientists in England have actually been tracking and observing fish in action. They don't say what kind of fish, but some of these scientists must have tremendous jobs. It'd be kind of neat to go to work every day and just watch fish swim around. But they observed fish tracking social relationships of other fish, that is, watching them, and developing their own social relationship. So fish were able to get along with each other. Maybe we can learn from fish. They observe fish using tools to build nests. So fish have social relationships, are aware of other social relationships, and actually can use tools to work. And they exhibit impressive long-term memory. And then parentheses, 3 months or more. Now that's pretty good. So a fish has social relationships, can interrelate with other fish, observes other social relationships, gets along with them, can use tools to dig holes in the sand, and has long-term memory. I'm losing the last part. If they can remember something for 3 months, they're doing pretty good. I've been building a little chicken coop. I'll set a hammer down, and it takes me an hour to find out remember where I put it. Now, this is a problem to an evolutionist. A fish cannot be that smart, you see, because we don't come from the fish line. We came from a gorilla who fell out of a tree. So the gorilla should be our ancestor, not the fish. But fish, it turns out, and their conclusion is fish have the intelligence level perhaps even higher than a gorilla. Now that's interesting. If a fish has been gifted with intelligence, and we don't come from the intelligence line, from the fish line rather, we come from the gorilla line, but the whole thing falls apart, doesn't it? The whole thing is, it's just kind of ludicrous. I just got a kick out of that little article. The reason that the fish is intelligent, and the reason that gorillas are intelligent, or have their intelligence, is because they're created by God. Everything was made by God. God created them, He created us. We are made in the image of God. And that doesn't mean just intelligence. Everything that God created has the stamp of the Creator on it. The trees and bushes out there have the stamp of the Creator in them. And you'd have to be foolish indeed to consider that an accident, wouldn't you, when you think about it. It is too complex. There is no such thing as a simple cell. All cells contain incredible memory, mind-boggling memory. DNA is a memory molecule. A single cell has more memory than our most complex computers. There's nothing simple in the world around you. Everything around you has the mark and stamp of the Creator, including fish. So think about that. When you read little articles like that in the paper, and there was another one about horseshoe crabs that I saw last week, and I was going to talk about that too. Horseshoe crabs have an amazing thing. Their blood is very unique. We can't duplicate it. Science can't duplicate it. Think about what you're reading, and think about the ramifications of that in the overall scheme of things. If fish are intelligent, it's a problem. Not for you, because you know that fish were created, and then you were created. But it's a problem for an evolutionist that is trying to build a path. And he's trying to do it without any designing influence at all. Evolutionists don't accept designing intelligence. That's a new term that's bouncing around now. So think about that. Next time you eat a fish sandwich, by the way, remember that this fish was more intelligent than you ever thought before. Perhaps a lot more intelligent, by the way, than the cow. Cows have very little memory. So think about that. Think about what a marvelous creation you and I are a part of. And think about the problems that an evolutionist has trying to fit everything together. We have some visitors here, and I insulted a biologist one time when I said that I went through the rock to the frog and he said, that's not what we're taught. She was an evolutionist. And I said, well, aren't you taught that at one time there was nothing, basically? Or that there was just matter and stuff? Well, yeah. I said, well, then aren't you taught that matter and stuff all by itself became an amphibian? Aren't you taught that we came from... Yeah. Well, okay, then a rock became a frog, and the amphibian became a human being eventually, so a rock became a frog, became a prince. That is what's being taught. But it's never put together that way. It's always the macroevolution, the microevolution that we can see, the natural selection. That's what's taught in biology classes. They don't take the other step right away. But there is the other step. So just praise God for what you are. You are created in His image, marvelously intelligent, far more than a fish, far more than a gorilla. And think about the creation around you. And as we discover more, we may find out that insects are a little smarter than we thought. Who knows? Thank you. This is my frog. Yep. No, I'm not going to do my standard thing with the frog. My standard thing is, once upon a time there was nothing, and the nothing exploded. This is the Big Bang theory. The nothing exploded, forming matter, particles. Over a long period of time, the particles, the matter, in the presence of the right kind of environment, created a primordial soup, and I have a can of soup back there that I use when I travel around. The soup gave birth to single-cell animals, all by accident, all by itself. Single-cell creatures became multi-cell creatures, and pretty soon they became an amphibian, Freddy the Frog. And Freddy, whether you kiss him or not, became a prince or a princess, depending on your heart's desire, all by accident. But that's not what this morning's creation moment is about. The reason I have this colorful frog is that I taught a philosophy course focusing on creation, or your worldview, and creation was a big part of that, to a group of homeschoolers at Bethany Baptist Church 2 years ago. And I've mentioned this so many times, the kids gave me this one and another one. And I have two frogs, Freddie and Frida. But the Institute for Creation Research is an interesting organization. We here primarily are associated with Answers in Genesis. We sponsor Answers in Genesis as a missions outreach for us. They are scientists as well. But the Institute for Creation Research, you must have to be a member of the Institute, and there are over 1,000 people involved in the Institute. To be associated with them, you must have a terminal degree in science, that is, a PhD in some science field. Evolution is not well accepted amongst scientists. You won't hear this publicly, but there are a lot of questions, a lot of concerns about the basic theory of evolution amongst scientists. I came to this route through a science road, if you will. My degree in physics I earned from Rensselaer in New York, and Rensselaer had meetings of physicists where they talked about the second law of thermodynamics. That's the reason I look like I do now, and not like what I did 40 years ago. Entropy, second law, things wear down, they wear out. And I stumbled across a paper written by a physicist who actually was head of the aerodynamics department of University of Colorado, where he said the second law precludes the possibility of classical evolution. So I thought about that a lot. And that's kind of how I wound up with, for those of you that don't know me, with the creation ministry before I became pastor here. Anyway, my friend Freddie, this morning, the creation moment is really about information. I discovered, reading the little bulletin from the Institute for Creation Research, there are still people that are trying to say, well, a tadpole becomes a frog, and if you notice, Freddie has legs, and he has feet. A tadpole becomes a frog, but a tadpole has no legs. A tadpole looks like a fish. A tadpole, when they're small, looks like a little guppy. So if a tadpole can go from being a tadpole to being Freddie, isn't that evolution? There are actually some people that are still saying that. Doesn't that show evolution? That's a takeoff on the old Dr. Ernst Haeckel fallacy of the theory of recapitulation, that the growth of the embryo in a human matches the evolution process, where the embryo starts out looking like a fish and all the way up. And that was shown to be a hoax in 1901. Dr. Haeckel faked every one of his drawings. It's still in the textbooks, but it's all false, completely false. Well, how would you answer that? Now, how would you answer that? If a tadpole becoming a frog, which has legs, how would you answer? That was an arm, excuse me. How would you answer that?
It had everything to be a frog completely as a tadpole.
It did. Information. The tadpole contained within it all of the information it required. Perfect answer. All the information it required to become a frog. Years ago, almost 42 years ago now, I went to a farm in Saco, the Boothby farm, and I saw this girl. Struck me as wicked pretty, and I was thinking about this And 40 years have gone by, and she still looks pretty much the same. She's still wicked pretty. When was it that the information was inserted for her to become what she is right there? And skin cells are being reproduced all the time. Cells are being reproduced all the time. You're not the same person you were. Your cells are constantly being reproduced and dying and sloughing off and being reproduced. And when was the information inserted? When it was a zygote? When the egg, even before that, when the egg was conceived, every single bit of information was available to become that girl right there. And this guy right here, when the egg was fertilized with the sperm, that moment of conception, all of the information is there. By the way, there's no such thing as a simple cell. That's a big fallacy of evolution in the first place. A single cell has more information in it than today's modern computers. There's no such thing as a simple cell. Because a cell contains DNA, which is, well, they're trying to harness DNAs for our computers because they're so much better than what we're using. At the moment of conception, that cell, that egg, had all the information to become Priscilla. Everything was foreordained to look just like she looks. All of that information was right there. Helga said to Carl this morning that Carl was handsome. And I won't ask for a discussion on that, but anyway, Helga said, you know, all of that handsomeness over there in Carl Dunbar, that was all programmed at the moment of conception in his mother. Amen. That he would look that he would look exactly like that. 66 years later, you said? So does a pollywog becoming a frog have anything to do with evolution? No, it doesn't. I think it's almost humorous that could even be brought up. But apparently it was, or Dr. Morris would not have mentioned it. I mean, it's almost a humorous thing. No, I hope you can see that, and the answer that I got here was absolutely flawlessly perfect. This man was right on the money. It's all about information. And information is a big problem for evolutionists. There's a physicist that I've quoted many times who says that, quite frankly, there is no known process of physics by which information can generate by itself. It must look kind of funny to a visitor that's just walked to see me holding this well, I won't go through the whole thing. Let me just say this is an object lesson. I'm not trying to. This is not my cousin. Anyway, all of the information that made Freddie the Frog was available in Freddie the Tadpole. It was all there. It's all about information. And information cannot generate by itself. Now, she's watching my frog pretty closely. Chuggaroom. Information does not generate by itself. Somebody has to put it there. So, a tadpole becoming a frog, I hope your answer is exactly like the gentleman that's visiting us. The perfect answer. Does it have anything to do with evolution? No, because all of the information, all of the DNA molecules were pre-programmed in that little tiny tadpole to become Freddie the Frog. All of the information that makes you what you are and the way you look today. And this is a hard spot for me with the abortion people. It's not pro-choice, by the way, because the baby has no choice. And I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it's the baby has no choice. You're either pro-abortion or pro-life. There's nothing to do with choice. It has the choice of the mother, but not the baby. So it's not pro-choice. But here's the problem, isn't it? If the way every one of you looks right now was pre-programmed at the moment of conception, so when were you a people? I'm a simple scientist. As a physicist, I conducted all of my work, professional work, before I became a pastor, using logic. Mathematical logic tells me I have no choice. You became a people at the moment of conception. The tadpole was already a frog. He didn't have his arms yet, but he was already a frog the minute he hatched out of that egg and became a tadpole. Information. A tadpole becoming a frog, that's really the point of the creation moment this morning. I hope you can answer just like this gentleman did. It has nothing to do with evolution. A tadpole becomes a frog with arms and legs because the information was pre-programmed in it. You look in the mirror and you look at yourself and you are what you are right now, whether you're 66 or 6. Because at the moment of conception, the information necessary to make you what you are was there already. Thank you. Give it back. He said, you've destroyed it. Okay. We went to had an interesting little canoe trip yesterday. We had fewer students than usual with our group. But the church we went to, the Pastor Sandy's kind of an interesting guy. It's the New England Christian Fellowship. It's in Conway, New Hampshire, anyhow. And he has quite a background. He has a master's degree in music from New England Conservatory of Music. He's a very interesting guy. But he studied a bunch of other religions before he became a Christian. And his approach to us was, whatever faith you have, whether you are a Buddhist, whether you are a Shintoist, whether you are a Hindu, whether you are a Muslim, whether you are a Christian, whatever faith you have should match the evidence before you. You should be able to line up the evidence with your faith. They should go together. And I kind of thought of that this morning as I was looking through the various things that I could do for the creation moment. For those of you that are new here, this is not a sermon. This is the creation moment time. I do a creation moment every Sunday morning. The principle behind the concept of evolution is, of course, everything is by accident, number one. Number two, you've heard the expression, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Well, actually, it's Darwin himself who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. That's the foundation upon which was built classical evolution. Those that are most fit destroy those that are not the most fit. So whenever you see something that doesn't quite fit that, it's kind of interesting. What did Christ say? I want to share with you something in the scripture from the book of Acts. Chapter 20, verse 35. Paul is speaking. He said, I have showed you all things, how that so laboring ye ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said it was more blessed to give than to receive. Now, that's interesting. Here's a statement made 2,000 years ago. He said, it's better to give, you're more blessed to give than to receive. Evolutionary science does not appear to support that, because the whole idea is the survival of the fittest. The whole idea is taking for yourself. Evolution is built on selfishness. I've even heard evolutionists say that children have to be selfish to survive. That's the whole concept. You destroy what's in your way. The weak are destroyed by the strong, and we happen to be the highest on the food chain. Have you heard that expression before? We're the highest on the food chain. That's because we're living here without Tyrannosaurus Rex. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying that. But Jesus said something 2,000 years ago that almost seems to not be sensible. Well, guess what? Evidence is being uncovered all the time. And here's the latest study. It's reported in Science magazine. It turns out that they did a 5-year study. The focus of this was elderly married couples, because there are none here like that. But the focus was elderly married couples, and they found out the amount of practical support that they received from people had no effect on them, on their longevity. Interesting, isn't it? They were hoping to find in this sociological study that those elderly couples that were supported by a strong family, by givers, by caretakers, they would do better. They didn't. There was no effect whatsoever. It was a placebo type thing. It was zilch. It was nothing. It was zero. However, for the givers, it was a very different story. Listen to this. Even factoring in various things. This was a study done, reported in Science magazine, done by sociological scientists. They factored in age and physical conditions and sex and mental condition and all that kind of stuff, economic status. There was a 42% reduction in mortality among those who were the caregivers. 42% reduction in mortality for those who were giving the care. 30%, this is practical care. They separate practical support from emotional support. A 30% reduction for those who gave emotional support. Isn't that interesting? That is exactly the opposite of what evolution would teach you to believe. If you accepted the precept of evolution, if you accepted Darwin's premise in his Origin of Species, the survival of the fittest, that it is important that the weak be destroyed. That was what Hitler was working towards, by the way. That it was important that you get those people that need glasses, you get rid of them. Just get rid of them. Those people that have any other kind of defect, you just get rid of them. Right? The survival of the fittest. Yet it turns out Jesus, 2,000 years ago, was more right than Darwin. We are not built up based on survival of the fittest. Jesus said, more blessed are those who give of themselves. You want to reduce your mortality level, don't receive anything from anybody, give to somebody. Isn't that cool? Totally flip-flop from the evolution, earthly, worldly position that it's the fittest that survive. According to God, it is the givingest that survive the longest. Isn't that something? A complete flip-flop. You want to live longer? Don't take things. Give. Wow. We're not used to that. You want to reduce your chance of dying soon? You want to extend the day that you're called home? Give. Just give. Give of yourself emotionally. Give of yourself physically. Give of your money. Give of whatever you have. The givers reduced their mortality rate. The receivers did not. And a giver is operating outside of the laws and rules of evolution. Outside of the laws and rules of what modern science says is our foundation. But not operating outside of the laws and rules of the Creator. You see, you didn't get here as people because you're more fit than a gorilla. You got here as people because you were made. We're going to talk about that this morning, a lot more in the sermon. You and I are made in the image of God. The stamp of the Creator is on you. You are not here because you're more fit. You are here because God put you here. You have the stamp of the Creator inside of you, not because you evolved it, but because God put it there. Think about that. Now we're going to talk more about that. Thank you. Okay, where did it go? I lost myself. What's the old joke? And it's not so much of a joke as you get older. The thing you miss the most is your mind. Anyway, I was kind of struck by this. It's a very small little thing, but you all know what a pterosaur looks like. At least we know what the pictures of them look like. A flying dinosaur is initially supposedly one of the very, very early of the flying dinosaurs. With the evolution perspective, everything has to grow in complexity. It has to start very simple and become more and more complex as time goes on. We have to start with a single cell. I've gone through this a kabillion times. We start with a single cell, and that single cell has to become a multiple cell and become more and more complex. All by accident, all without design, all by itself. Nonsense. That's not a scientific position at all, by the way. It really is not. I get involved in this, and so did, I think, Bill Smith, and back here was, he and I shared some thoughts a couple years ago. The Smiths have been coming for a while, and he also is interested in the evolution creation issue pretty intensely, an engineer himself. But it's not an engineering or scientific position. It's a nonsense position, because we know that's impossible. And in fact, there are some very honest evolutionists that know that. One of the forwards to Darwin's book, Origin of Species, written by a scientist just about 20 years ago, says we know that evolution is impossible. We know that for evolution to work, that spontaneous generation must occur. There's no other way. And we know spontaneous generation is impossible. But for philosophical reasons, his name is George Wald, Dr. George Wald, we do not accept creation for philosophical reasons. We don't have that problem here in this church. In fact, no scientist should. We're after the truth. And the truth is given to us in the Scripture, and the truth is thrown at us over and over again. Pterosaurs. Were they a clumsy, awkward flyer? Like a little tiny child, when they start to walk, they fall and tumble frequently. Was a pterosaur like that? As it turns out, there's an article in November last year in New Scientist. There's an article in October in Nature magazine talking about the same thing. The brain size of the pterosaurs, all of them, there's a whole bunch of them, there's a whole family of them, but the brain size is actually 4 times. There's an area in the brain that is specifically appointed, is called the flocculus, and I'm a physicist, I'm not a biologist, but the flocculus area of the brain is the area in a bird's brain that controls flight. The flight habits, flight techniques, the way they're able to maneuver. It's the flight control area. Well, the pterosaurs, all of them, have about 4 times larger flocculus area than modern birds. So researchers, not creationists now, evolutionists, are now saying, apparently the pterosaurs could fly better than today's birds. And this is a statement not being made by a creationist. This is a statement being made by 2 different evolutionists. You can read the articles. They're in New Scientist and Nature magazine, 2 different magazines, that says, gee, wait a minute, pterosaurs probably could fly better than today's birds. The flocculus area, being the size as it is, could build up detailed in-flight maps of the forces being experienced by their smart wings, giving pterosaurs extraordinary flight control. Cool. You know that, and I know that. But do you realize what it means for an evolutionist to say that? Do you get what that means? Do you understand the position that puts an evolutionist in? They hope you don't. They hope you are dumb enough to just accept what they say and not challenge it. This puts them in a position of having to admit birds didn't evolve. Evolution means that you started clumsy, you started slow, you started ineffective, and slowly became more and more effective. That's what evolution is built on. Without that, it all crumbles. So when an evolutionist says, wow, pterosaurs, they probably fly better than today's birds. They probably were extremely capable aerobatics, or whatever you want to call them. That is saying we got no clue how birds evolved. That's what they're saying. See, the reason for that is, of course, that science, the Bible supports science. Science supports God's Word because God's Word is God's Word. And you and I know where birds came from. And God said. And it was so. And it was morning and evening. And I guess what was the day that birds were created? 5th? I forget. 4th or 5th? I can't remember. One of the days. All happened in 6 days. Bottom line. Think critically. Think critically. And when you hear evolutionists say something like pterosaurs could probably fly better than today's birds, stop to think of what that means. A pterosaur was supposed to be the first flying creature, so it should be very clumsy. That's a startling thing. It means that evolutionary scientists have no clue as to how birds evolved. Because according to evolution, it started simple and got more and more complex. Now, to us, it makes sense that pterosaurs could fly better than today's birds. He's doing pretty well. Today's birds have lost information compared to the pterosaurs. 8% of the brain is the flocculus in a pterosaur. 1.5% is the flocculus in today's birds. They've lost information. Isn't that interesting? God is a great God. Romans chapter 1 reminds us that the creation around us overwhelms us with the glory, the designing ability, and the power of God. Think about that. Thank you. To coast and sea to sea. Hang on. I forgot about that. How long have the mountains been there? How long does it take to form a mountain? The whole concept, the foundation of evolution is uniformitarianism. It's something introduced by a guy named Charles Lyell a long time ago, 150, 180 years ago. Everything's going along at the same slow pace. In a sense, of course, for evolution to happen in their minds, in the minds of evolutionists, millions and millions, billions, 4.5 billion years are required to get from point A. The mountains have to have been in process for millions and millions of years. If you go to Franconia Notch, my wife likes the music. We keep going in there, and I keep grating my teeth every time I watch it. There's a video presentation about Franconia Notch, and it starts off with 400 million years ago. And then it goes, they repeat it 100,000 times, 400 million years ago. You know, and the music's nice, and the pictures are nice. Pictures are nice, and the music's nice, yes. And I'm sitting there going, I feel like jumping up and saying, no! But anyway, did the mountains form over 400 million years? Are they 400 million years old? There are problems with that view. And in fact, these are kind of startling to scientists today. Scientists are struggling between explaining this phenomenon. Mountains are shrinking very rapidly. And they're saying, well, we're getting more accurate at our measurements. Well, not exactly. The scientists realize that's not the whole story. For example, Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa has been lowered by 9 feet, 3 meters, which is a little over 9 feet. Lakes are shrinking. Lake Chad has shrunk 95% in the last 100 years. The Dead Sea is 52 feet shallower now than it was before. The coastline of Uzbekistan has had to be redrawn because of the sea shrinking and moving away. Everything is changing much more rapidly. It doesn't fit the model. Remember, the whole idea of this issue of evolution creation, it's your worldview. You either have a worldview that God is real, God is creator, and God acted, or you have a worldview that God doesn't exist, or if he does exist, he's just out there floating around and he's just ignoring everything that's going down here. Those are the only two worldviews possible. That God is busy, has been a creative force in the world, or that God is not a creative force in the world. And you can explain many things looking at them from either of those worldview positions. Your job as a thinking human being is to line up which view supports or explains the data the best. That's what we have to do. Now, if you have the worldview that there's no God and the mountains formed over 400 million years, then these shrinking coastlines and dribbling mountains are a disaster for you because it blows the whole concept of uniformitarianism away. Stephen Jay Gould was aware of that, and he came up with something called I forgot the name, punctuated equilibrium, excuse me. Punctuated equilibrium as an evolution explanation, that things went along in spurts, because he was smart enough to realize, he's dead now, but now he knows the truth, but he was smart enough to realize classical evolution did not explain the whole picture. Mountains are shrinking. Mount St. Helens dropped over 1,000 feet in one day. Spirit Lake and Spirit Crater, little mini Grand Canyons formed in a week or so. And yet if you go to the Grand Canyon, I've been there a couple of times, 3 times, you will hear the rangers tell you, well, over millions and millions of years, the Colorado River moving down through the canyon carved out this canyon. Well, that's a worldview, isn't it? A little bit of water over millions of years could do a lot of work. But a lot of water over a very short time can do even more work. In fact, mining operations are done by a lot of water at high pressure over a very short time. It's a worldview issue. But what supports the data the best? And what supports the data, what data supports the view the best is the view that supports creation. A lot of water in a short period of time. Mount St. Helens is an example of that. Spirit Crater, Spirit Lake, or the crater that goes along with it, I forgot the name of it, but formed within a matter of a few days. And it's got all the layers on the side that look as if it was millions and millions of years old. And of course, layers don't mean millions and millions of years. You can form layer after layer after layer in an experiment. We have a video downstairs from Dr. Ken Hovind that does that in a fish tank. And he forms layers and layers and layers in 5 minutes, just flowing water through sand. Bottom line, mountains are shrinking. The Earth's shape is changing way too fast to support the worldview of accidental evolution. Way too fast. There's not enough time. And if the time were there, the mountains wouldn't be there because they're eroding quicker than they're forming. Not enough time. The worldview that is based on long periods of time by accident does not support what we're seeing here. Does not support what people are seeing as they study geology today. Mountains are disappearing, lakes are shrinking. Everything is happening in a far more rapid dynamic than would be guessed at or be proposed by the evolution concept of long periods of time, no designer. What we see matches the scripture. God said, God said, God said, and there was about 6,000, 7,000 years ago. That supports the picture that we see far more realistically than the other. Think about it. Thank you. Is that any logical scientist is an evolutionist. And if you accept creation, then you are somehow an inferior scientist or not a real scientist. One of the things that the Answers in Genesis people do with Creation magazine, this is one of the latest, and I kind of like the idea, and I kind of stress this from time to time. There are real scientists working in the scientific world today, making fantastic achievements that are 100% creationist. And in this last issue, there's a husband and wife team, John and Sally McEwen. John has a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD in chemistry, and he designs and builds drugs. I had a friend that did that, by the way, back in Albany. And his wife, Sally, has a bachelor's and a master's degree in chemistry, and she does likewise, but for a different company. Well, these are two chemists that work in the biochemical field, if you will, both of them involved in the design of drugs. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you follow the debate at all If you are at all involved, for example, in teaching, and you hear statements that are made by some of the people involved with the teachers' unions, you will hear things like this, and in fact, Dr. Dobhansky, is the one credited with saying this: nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And you'll hear this passed around and bandied around and spread around in the education circles. But is that true? As Dr. John says, that there are two things that you have to consider: common design or common descent. The evolutionist takes the position. Remember I said it's a worldview. It's how you perceive things. It's where you come from in your head. It's the bias that you have already built in there. Either things came down through a common descent, or it shows a common design. Either one. Either one. Which one makes the most sense? Which one is most scientific? And these two scientists believe that it is common design. Sally says, and this is so true, because I went through the system. I spent 2 years as a biochemistry or microbiology major at the University of Maine back in the early 60s, and very little was said about evolution. Biochemical and biological processes can be discovered without reference to or knowledge of their origins. We never talked about origins at university back in the early 60s, and yet we were making fantastic medical discoveries, biochemical discoveries all the time. Then she goes on to point out many of the founders of modern science were influenced by creationist thinking. And then she says, and this is interesting, and this is so true, it's been my observation, this is as a practicing scientist today that is designing drugs. It has been my observation, and when I say that, by the way, I don't mean recreational drugs, I hope you understand that. I mean medical assist drugs. It has been my observation that when new processes are discovered to exist, it is only afterwards that investigators begin to speculate on their origins and why they exist in light of evolution. In other words, evolution is accepted a priori. It's accepted automatically. Just want you to know, the whole purpose of this little creation moment this morning is to point out, here's a picture of them. Dr. John and Sally McEwen, one with a PhD and one with a master's in chemistry, actively working, designing drugs, very well known in their field, practicing scientists today. And it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to think, to realize, I believe. It's encouraging to me, and I hope it's encouraging to you, that there are scientists that are active and alive and working today that understand the significance of the creation position, that do not accept the nonsense of evolution. I'm frequently asked, when people find out that I worked as a physicist, well, how did you wind up being a pastor? Well, it was kind of a long process, and not one I would have designed myself, I'll tell you that. But quite frankly, it came and began with the concept of the evolution-creation debate. As a practicing scientist, the position of classical evolution was pure nonsense. Absolute 100% pure scientific nonsense. I could see that. Colleagues of mine could see it. I had a paper in my hands once a few years ago from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I went to school, written by a physicist who said evolution as presented is impossible. They get together and they talk about things like this. Physicists do. The media would never, by the way, the media never reported that. You never heard a single word about that. If somebody makes a statement stressing the value of evolution, it'll be blasted over all the newspapers. But when somebody at a significant university like RPI makes a statement contrary to that, you never hear it. You never hear it. Why? Because Satan is behind all of this. I'm 100% convinced. They go on to say, too, and I like this, why are these two scientists risking their reputation at a very young, they're very young people, as you can see by their picture. They're risking their reputation because there are people, scientists in the United States, professors at university that have proposed that degrees be removed from people if they later on, after graduating, take a creationist position. I have that quote from a professor from the University of Michigan in the biochemistry department that says he believes degrees should be removed if a person ever takes a creationist position later. They're sticking their neck out. They're offering themselves as an encouragement to the rest of us as Christians, and some of us as budding scientists perhaps, and they're sticking their neck out. They're saying, look at me, I'm a scientist. I make my living as a scientist, but I do not accept the nonsense of evolution. Why are they doing that? And here's the answer. John and Sally both agree that evolution is a belief system that tries to explain the complexity, it's a quote, of living things without any intelligent input. So of course it is a stumbling block to people believing in anything else we may say about God and the Bible. Why more Christians don't get the connection, I don't know. Evolution is such a big deal, the evolution creation issue. If you evolve, the entire gospel is false. Because death is not the result of sin, it's the natural consequences of things, and it's false. They understand that, and they're willing to put their reputations on the line for it. And they close their little article with Proverbs 29:25, and I'll close this morning with Proverbs 29:25. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord will be kept safe. Don't be afraid of man. Fear of man is a snare. Trust in the Lord and you will be kept safe. So I hope this is encouraging. It was encouraging to me, and once a month or so we'll do something like this. I've been doing it for quite a while. When I find some creation scientists or scientists who are creationists, I got to be careful, that are willing to put their reputations on the line. It's a very significant thing. It's a very important thing. And they feel very strongly about it. So there you have it. A couple of practicing biochemists believe in creation, in the process right now of designing drugs, and are very successful at it. Thank you.